Alright everyone, doing what will probably be the last impressions video of 2022 here. We have an interesting one this time. This is Need for Speed Unbound for the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. This is a current gen only Need for Speed game, and before I get started here, I just want to mention that I think EA has done a terrible job marketing this game. I mean, unless you were basically following the gaming news or, you're involved in basically what's going on in the industry, you probably don't even know that this game exists. I've seen virtually no commercials for this game, and even with the good reviews that this game is receiving, EA has not really done much in the way of letting people know that this game actually exists. It came out on the same day as the Callisto Protocol, and that is a game with, a much less profitable publisher, but received a much more sizable marketing budget, I feel. Now, by now, you probably heard that this game is the best Need for Speed game that released in an entire generation. In fact, when you install this game on PS5, which is the version that I'm playing here, plastered on the home screen before you even start the game is a quote from the reviewer: "This is the best Need for Speed game that released in an entire generation." Now, that's not a high bar to cross, but I have to say, playing it now, that is absolutely true. What Criterion managed to do with this game is present a more focused, more compelling racing game than any of the entries on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. And yeah, you can have fun with some of those games. I don't think any of those games are bad games, but as I mentioned in my Need for Speed Heat review video, in fact, I'll leave a card up in case you never watched that video, but that was a deep dive in which I expressed I feel that there's a lack of any creative desire or interest from the developers or from anyone over at EA to actually reclaim the greatness that this franchise once held. So I've been sitting here waiting for a decent Need for Speed game for an entire generation now, and well, how's Unbound? For me, it's a bit of a mixed bag, I'm actually surprised to say. Now, Criterion, who are considered by many to be the masters of arcade racing games in general, they brought us the excellent Burnout series, which I've been a fan of for many years since the original, and they are responsible for the best Need for Speed game of the 7th generation, Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, the reboot of that franchise. So I was very excited and interested to see what they were going to do with Unbound. I was like, finally, someone who knows what they're doing is going to sit here and be able to create a solid racing game. And I have to say that I like Unbound. In fact, before we get into the review here, I just want to make it known, I like this game. I think this is a good Need for Speed game. But there are some creative decisions that were made here that I feel held this game back from being truly great, like a truly great racing game that it could have been. And unfortunately, these are some big issues that have to do with a lot. And we'll get to that towards the end of the video. I want to make sure I get the good stuff out of the way first. So for one, let's talk about the visuals here. This is a current generation only racing game. You cannot get this on the prior generation of systems, so that's great. What Criterion has done here is they've basically meshed in a more cartoonish animated style with its character rendering, and of course a lot of these effects to give this game a more signature art style compared to prior racing games, and they've kind of meshed these overlaid on top of hyper-realistic environments. Now, at first glance, when you're watching this in a video, it may seem weird, it may seem distracting, but I have to say, spending now, almost 20 hours with the game that I'm recording this video since, I really kind of like this art direction. In fact, I like the way the characters are. They're a lot more expressive than the prior Need for Speed games. I feel like they really fit with what they're trying to accomplish here. It doesn't look too jarring on screen. I was a bit indifferent when I saw the actual art direction for the first time, and I wasn't sure if it was going to actually work out. But playing the game now and spending a good time with the game, I have to say that I do like the character rendering. I think they're a lot more expressive. They remind me sort of like the past Need for Speed games where they use these realistic actors, kind of overlaid this more animated, cel-shaded art direction over them to make them more glossy and a little bit more animated in design, but they're actually real actors. In this game, they kind of just went full anime style, and I think it looks good for the most part. The cars are also suitably detailed. In fact, this is where you kind of notice where all the next generation power, the grunt, was really focused on. The actual texture work and the detail of the environments looks fantastic. I think that we should compare this game to Need for Speed 2015 because although, that game with its flaws aside was one of the most eerily photorealistic games that I played during the last generation. And I think still to this day stands as being one of the best looking games of all time, just especially in motion. When it really came down to the way that game looked, it was about post-processing, like the way that they got the shutter speed for the motion blur perfect, the texture work for the cars, the game taking place only during the night, and they kind of utilized the reflective rainy atmosphere of that world to really kind of bring out a more pseudo-realistic environment. It just looked really, really good in motion. I think Unbound takes all of the smart elements from that game's art direction and kind of, it takes place during the day too. This game does a lot more with its graphics than, Need for Speed 2015. But I think that this game looks really good on a whole. When you first look at it, it doesn't jump out at you as being sort of a, current gen only game. But when you start looking at sort of the fine detail, I mean, I noticed individual raindrops and streaks forming on the cars and dripping down dynamically during the rain. It looked really good in motion. And I think the environments come together really nice. There's good detail on the ground. There's no ray tracing or any special effects being utilized in this game. But I think on the whole, this is a very good racing game that looks a lot better, especially in HDR on a big giant 4K TV. I think no one's going to have an issue with the way that this game looks. It also runs at a silky smooth 60 frames per second, and during my 18 hours of the game so far, I have to say that I haven't experienced one dip whatsoever on PlayStation 5. So this game runs pretty much perfect and looks really good in my opinion. I think that as far as the polish goes, this game does a really good job of making sure that all the boxes are ticked. The sound design is also very well done in this game. They've perfectly matched the way that engines sound depending on where you are in the environment, whether you're in the middle of a city, in the tunnel, out in the countryside. Even the cop sirens make different noises depending on the health that they have, so you know exactly how much health that they have just by listening to the sound of their siren. And the way that the crashes feel, I do have to say that the damage is a little bit held back. Don't expect your cars to look like the Burnout series after they're done with races. This game's a bit muted when it comes to the actual damage and the way that damage is shown on your vehicles. I don't mind that, but just nitpicking here, there are some things like that they've creatively made to kind of make this game a little bit more mature than I think the Burnout series. And I just think that the vibe of the game is much more well realized and makes a lot more sense. It definitely has more of a focus on the street racing side and sort of that theme, rather than it trying to be sort of events and street racing or heist and stuff like that Payback and Heat tried to do. It definitely emphasizes the more street racing scene, and I think that that's a good thing. It reminds you of the older Need for Speed games and does a good job of bringing it up to, I think, modern expectations. That being said, I will have to say that I'm not a fan of the music decision. It feels to me that there's only one style of music throughout this entire game, and so it's kind of like hip hop and kind of mixes with some more electronic themes, but I just didn't find much variety in the music. That to me was a bit of a letdown. There's been a handful of songs that I've actually enjoyed listening to, and other than that, I've actually turned down the volume of the music within the game itself because I found it a little bit overpowering when it came to just the random events that are going on. So that's going to depend on kind of what you're into as far as your music tastes go, but I just found there was one particular style of music throughout the entire game, and it was kind of a hit or miss for me on that front. And I also want to mention that when I installed this game, there was no update file. In fact, this is version 1.000, not even like a 1.1, no day one update, nothing. I have never played a game this generation that has never had an update file from the moment I put the disc in. And this is the first game in quite a long time that has had that. So that alone, I think, shows confidence in that Criterion developed a very solid racing game. I've had, some glitches here and there, but it's nothing game breaking. And to be honest, this game I feel is more polished than the majority of games that come out, even with day one patches. And so, that being said, I think that this game is well put together. It runs well. It looks good. I think the quality of the game is there. Now, let's talk about some of the issues. And boy, do I have a bit of a rant coming up here. For one, there's control. Now, Criterion is responsible for developing some of the most fast-paced, most responsive racing games on the market. And I haven't been a fan of the way that prior Need for Speed games have felt. I feel like they've tried to emulate more realistic handling, but wanted to retain sort of the arcadey feel and the way that the cars behave and sort of move. And what Criterion has done here is they tried to emulate the more recent Need for Speed games in terms of their control feel. This game is the most realistic handling Criterion racing game that I have ever played. All of the cars have real weight to them, they feel heavy, and in fact, this game is designed around one specific method of driving. You basically have to master drifting at almost all turns, and unlike Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, which carried your speed and momentum, during high stakes drifts. I mean, that was one of the most fun elements in that game for me, is that, you could sit there and do crazy drifts at high speeds, and it fit the theme of the game, I feel. Unbound here basically feels like a mixed bag. This game is the slowest feeling Criterion racing game that I have ever played. The sense of speed is held back considerably by the more realistic handling of the vehicles. It still falls within the arcade racing spectrum, so don't go feeling like you're going to be playing Gran Turismo or Forza or even Forza Horizon, which I feel is a little bit more realistic than this game. But it's just the weight of the cars. You feel the weight of each car kind of shifting through as you're drifting around corners. And to me, I just didn't exactly care for this. When you crash or when you hit a car, it brings down your speed considerably, and it can be extremely difficult at times to actually retain your place in a race, because if you make one mistake, it feels like you're doomed for the entire race. I do not care for the driving of this game. It gets a little bit better, a little bit more fun as you start unlocking better vehicles and more faster cars. But this brings me to yet another issue I have with this game, and that is progression. They have borrowed some of the elements from Need for Speed Heat here, and these are some of the worst elements of that game, and I feel that they're some of the worst elements of this game still, all these years later. For one, dynamism is back in the races. What I mean by this is cops can just dynamically enter the race at any single point, and there have been a few times where the police have actually cost me first place because I feel I was being targeted, and due to the random nature of the game, you are not guaranteed the same behavior even after a restart. Not only that, this game doesn't really care much about the placement of the race. It's not like you have to get first place or in the top 3 in all your events. The only thing that this game cares about is money. I didn't care for this as well, but you basically have to earn enough money to eventually buy new cars in a class and upgrade your existing cars. In fact, I would say that this game puts more of an emphasis on upgrading your current car rather than buying new vehicles outright. Now, you can do a lot with the upgrade system of this game, and it's fairly simplified in a way that is easy to understand for people like myself who don't really know what the hell a lot of these parts do. But I'll tell you this, that I was racing with the same car, the same starter car, for almost 8 hours before I actually unlocked a second vehicle. And this frustrated me. I grew bored of the vehicle that I was driving, and I felt that I was earning money at a snail's pace. The entire progression of this game felt a lot like padding to me, like the game didn't need to be as long as it was, but due to the design decisions, the game kind of forces you to compete in more events and discourages you from buying new vehicles and just wants you to stick to one or a couple cars. In fact, what you have to do is you have to own a car in each of the 4 classes that this game offers, and so you have to have a car, one car for each class to compete in an event. So the whole idea is you trying to earn enough money to buy a car that reaches its class, and then you can even upgrade lower class cars to higher class tiers. I didn't care for this at all because you spent more time with the vehicles that you purchased, you were able to master them, but I just felt that for variety's sake, I was extremely bored of driving the same Mustang, the same Plymouth, the same McLaren over and over and over again in these races, Not only that, but the tracks themselves are very low on the variety side. For the vast majority of time playing this game, I found myself racing on the same subset of tracks over and over again, doing different events that took place on the same tracks, and it just grew frustrated. I grew bored of the tracks that I was playing on, and this game is an open world game, and so it blocks off a section of that world for you to do those races. And in fact, lock off wouldn't even be a good term because it's completely open for cops to enter at any single point. But man, I just feel like this game grew stale very, very quick. And just due to the frustrations with controls, the frustrations with the random cop nature. Now, I will say this about the AI of the police themselves. They are much more tame and much more manageable than Need for Speed Heat. So I wasn't ready to break my screen like I was playing Need for Speed Heat, because that game's cop system was just broken once you reached a certain point. It's a lot more manageable and I think easier to escape from the police this time around than the prior Need for Speed games. But that said, it still gives you a level of challenge. It just pissed me off a lot of times when I was driving to an event because, again, the entire game's open world. You can't fast travel to events, but you have to drive to events. You might be seen by the cops, and then this initiates a chase that goes on for 5 or 10 minutes, and you're sitting here circling the event that you want to do, and you have to sit here and just escape from the cops. And sometimes they, depending on how high of a wanted level that you have, this could take, minutes upon minutes. That just is wasted time. You just want to play the game, but the game, of course, has these, police patrolling, and I just felt it was frustrating. I feel that what holds this game back the most is its desire to be an open world game. I would have preferred if we just had an events-based, simplistic racing game, kind of like Need for Speed Hot Pursuit. You choose the events you want, you choose the car you want to race, and you just go off and do it. Or even something where they break off sections of the world to different parts of the story. In fact, rather than just give you this entire world to explore and drive around in. I just grew extremely frustrated at the pacing of this game. I am 18 hours in, and I think I'm a little bit more than halfway through the game. And I can tell you that a good chunk of that time, hours of that time, was spent with unnecessary padding. I have found that if I played this game for more than 2 hours, it just ensues frustration. And it can just be exhausting to actually play, which is sad because I love Criterion. I've loved all of their games in the past, but this is a game I feel that is creatively held back. It's a good game. It's well polished. I feel like there's a good selection of cars here. I feel like, it's much more of a focused experience compared to the prior Need for Speed games. But man, I wish the controls of the game were more similarly in line with the past games from Criterion. I wish that cops couldn't just dynamically enter races at any single point. In fact, let them dynamically enter races, but sometimes when you just want to drive to an event, it feels like you were being stopped at every single turn. Like the game's purposely trying to halt you from progressing the game because it wants to initiate you in a high-speed pursuit. And of course, they've borrowed, again, the bounty system from Need for Speed Heat, where all of the money you earn in that day, if you are caught by the police, it is gone. So I have lost tens of thousands of dollars at some points due to the actual police system of this game, which again kind of holds back progression because you need that money to upgrade your cars. You need that money to buy new vehicles, and it could take a long time to earn a lot of money relatively quickly. I feel like there needed to be more variety when it came to the tracks, more variety when it came to the music, and I just feel it needed to be more of a Criterion racing game rather than them trying to emulate the work that Ghost Games did with the prior Need for Speed titles. I just grew very frustrated playing this game after long hours, and to be honest, it's one of the reasons why this game has taken me almost, at this point actually, over a week to actually complete, because I just find myself not being able to continue after a couple hours of playing because I just grow frustrated at the game's creative decisions, the police system, doing the same races on the same tracks with the same car, and it's just, I just wish the game was a little bit more liberal with the way that it handed out these races with the cars that you've earned. and it just moved things along at a much quicker pace. And it sucks, I just feel very, very sad to say this because I want to see this game do well. I love Criterion and all their games, but this game feels the most non-Criterion of all of Criterion's games. Like, if they didn't have their logo on the box, there's nothing here that would have signified to me, oh yeah, this feels like a Criterion racing game. For a lot of people, they might actually like that, because I know not everyone's into this super hyper arcade racing, control and feel of, games like Burnout and even Need for Speed Hot Pursuit game during the 7th generation. But man, I just expected a little bit more here, and I was just sad to see them take sort of the creative direction that they did. Now, that being said, like I said at the beginning of this video, I like this game, and I can recognize that it's a well put together game that's well polished and just more focused and just better realized than any of the past Need for Speed games. The past Need for Speed games to me felt creatively confused and desperate. This game does not feel desperate, perhaps slightly creatively confused, but I can see that Criterion was trying to create something that was more familiar rather than take risk here, so I don't even want to say that. I just feel like they should have made something that had its own identity, that took a little bit more risks when it came to the controls, and was in essence something that was a full-on open world scale Need for Speed Hot Pursuit game or something like that, compared to something like this. I like this game, but yeah, there are a lot of things here that just kind of frustrate me, and I just wanted this game to be excellent. I wanted to sit here and say, this is it. This is the best Need for Speed game that we've had in a very long time, and I guess honestly, technically it is, which just speaks to how lackluster the previous Need for Speed games were. But yeah, it's just this game, it didn't surprise me in the ways that I was looking to be surprised, and I just felt myself, again, more frustrated than I was having fun a lot of the times. And that's why I have to play this game at a little bit more of a slower pace, because when all those creative decisions start, boiling up, and it's one small thing after the other, and then you're competing and you're doing the same thing, and then it's like you want a new car, but you can't afford the new car, and you have to upgrade the existing car, and then the cops are, sitting here and they steal first place from you, and, you're behind on a race, and it just feels like nothing you ever do will ever get you up to the front. Yeah, I don't know. It's not like this is my first Need for Speed game, far from it. I've been playing the game since the PlayStation 1 days, so I'm very well familiar with this franchise, but I just feel like everyone's trying to reclaim the glory of like the Most Wanted days, the classic Most Wanted days. And I feel like it would have just been a smarter move for them to sort of create a smaller scale, events only based racing game that nailed the controls, that nailed the feeling of what people wanted in a Need for Speed game, rather than try to create a more polished Need for Speed Payback or Need for Speed Heat experience here. And I just feel like that's what's holding this game back the most. So those are my impressions on the game. Yeah, mixed bag here, but again, I do like the game, and I recognize that all the things it does very well. And yes, I do feel that this is a much better game than any of the Need for Speed games that came out last generation, but it is being creatively held back. And I just feel like, this isn't it. This is a step in the right direction. This is a good foundation to build a much better Need for Speed game off of. And I feel like Criterion at this point is the only developer that can do it. But just take more risks. I don't want to see them being pressured into having to create an open world racing game. Like, every Need for Speed game needs to be an open world racing game. Some of the best Need for Speed games were just simple event-based racing games. And I feel that would have been a much more better use of the developers' talents. And it just would have been nice to have like a budget Need for Speed game, something that costs like $50. Here, it's events only. It'll take you 10 hours to finish. You can race between a variety of cars, and there's different, modes and stuff. There's online play, just something there, rather than create this world where all you can do is drive to events that you would play, and then it creates this extra padding because you have to escape from the cops as you're on your way to the events. And it's just like it adds this unnecessary pressure, this unnecessary amount of time to your overall playthrough that is just more frustrating than it is rewarding. So that's where I stand on Need for Speed Unbound. If you played this game, please let me know what you think. I'm actually very curious to see, because I don't see a lot of people talking about this game, Unfortunately, EA has done nothing to actually market this and let people know it actually exists. And other than that, I'll see you guys here for the next one. Thank you all so much for just being supportive with these impressions videos. I'll see you guys next year where things are actually going to be changing quite a lot in terms of how these impressions videos are done. So be on the lookout for that. We'll have more to discuss then. And until then, I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good one.